Welcome to Across the Pitch. Let's get into it. Let's talk about that absolute disaster class at the Etihad where Chelsea's season continues to sink like the Titanic. Coming into this one, you're thinking, okay, Chelsea off that win against Wolves, City looking vulnerable after that PSG defeat. This could be interesting, right? Well, football has other ideas. First half kicks off, and actually, Chelsea start brilliantly. Get this, they take the lead, looking comfortable, and then Cole Palmer's through on goal with a chance to make it 2-0. Square it to Jackson, and it's game over. But the chance goes begging, and my word, doesn't that just sum up Chelsea's season? But here's where it gets really interesting. And by interesting, I mean baffling. Enzo Maresca, and let me tell you something about this manager, decides to do something we've seen absolutely nobody do against City in the last 3 months. He sits back. No press, no intensity, just letting City have the ball and hoping for the best. When you look at what PSG did midweek, when you look at what every team that's taken points off City has done, it's been about pressure, pressure, pressure. But Chelsea? They're playing like they're 4-0 up with nothing to worry about. And speaking of worries, let's talk about Robert Sanchez, because this is getting beyond a joke now. The scary thing is, this isn't even surprising anymore. Chelsea have now had 7 goalkeepers on their books, and somehow they've managed to pick the one that makes you miss Kepa. That's not normal. When you've spent the kind of money Chelsea have spent, when you've got the ambitions they have, you cannot have a goalkeeper that's making these kinds of mistakes every single game. But here's what's really fascinating about this whole situation. It's not just about Sanchez anymore. It's about Maresca's stubbornness in continuing to pick him. When you've got a goalkeeper making these kinds of errors, when you've got other options available and you still keep picking him, that's on the manager. And don't get me started on that post-match interview where he's still backing him. They're standing by your players. And then there's this kind of blind loyalty that's actually hurting the team. The thing about Chelsea right now is they're getting exactly what they deserve. 1 win in their last 7 league games. Think about that. This is a club that spent over £1 billion, and they're looking more likely to be in a mid-table battle than challenging for Champions League spots. But let's talk about these individual performances, because what we witnessed today was shocking. Cole Palmer. He's been absolutely brilliant this season, carrying this Chelsea team at times. But today, invisible. And this wasn't just any game. This was against his former club, the perfect stage to make a statement, and he completely ghosted. That chance in the first half when he could have squared it to Jackson, that's trying to be too perfect when you should just be taking the shot yourself. And speaking of attacking players, Nico Jackson, 7 games without a goal now. Remember when everyone was saying he just needed time to settle? Well, how much more time do you need? Yes, he gets an assist today, but outside of that, nothing. The movement's not there, the finishing's not there, and most worryingly, the confidence looks completely shot. But here's where it gets really interesting. The whole front line was just dysfunctional. Sancho had a quiet game, barely made an impact. And when you look at the way Chelsea set up, you start to understand why. No press, no intensity, just players standing around waiting for something to happen. When you've got that much pace in your attack, Jackson's speed, Palmer's movement, Madueke's dribbling ability, why are you playing like a mid-table team hoping to nick a point? The fascinating thing about this Chelsea team is how they've managed to make some very good players look absolutely average. Look at what happened to Cole Palmer today. Completely isolated, no support, having to drop deeper and deeper just to get a touch of the ball. This is a player who's been your shining light this season, and today he couldn't even get into the game. And let's talk about that midfield, because this is where games are won and lost. Enzo Fernandez in the middle of the park? Poor. Just poor. For a player of his quality, for someone who's supposed to be controlling games, he was nowhere to be seen. The scariest thing is, this isn't just a one-off anymore. These performances are becoming more and more common, and at some point, you've got to start asking questions. But let's talk about these broader implications, because this is where it gets really concerning for Chelsea. When you look at the upcoming fixtures, West Ham at home. Okay, you'd expect to win that. But then, Brighton away, Aston Villa away. Then you've got Arsenal and Spurs coming up. The way they're playing right now, where are the points coming from? This is a team that's sinking in the league table, and Bournemouth are closing in. At Villa can get within a point. It's absolute chaos! And here's what's really fascinating about this whole situation. The sporting directors. Like I said before, they've got 8 goalkeepers on their books. 8. You've got Sanchez, Petrovic, Bettinelli, Bergstrom. I could go on. And somehow, with all these options, they've managed to pick the one keeper who's making game-changing mistakes almost every single week. The recruitment is just baffling. But the scariest thing isn't even the goalkeeper situation. It's what they're trying to do in this transfer window. Instead of addressing the obvious issues, instead of bringing in that clinical striker they desperately need, what are they doing? They're looking at spending £60 million on Garnacho. Don't get me wrong, good player. But is that really what this Chelsea team needs right now? And speaking of needs, let's talk about what this means for Chelsea financially, because this is where it gets really serious. They cannot afford another year without Champions League football. The implications of missing out again would be massive. But instead of addressing these immediate concerns, they're still stuck in this project mentality, this idea of building for the future, while the present is crumbling around them. The fascinating thing about this Chelsea board is how they've managed to spend over £1 billion and somehow made the team worse. Talking about this being a 4-window plan, well, guess what? We're in the 5th window now. And what have they got to show for it? A team that can't defend set pieces, can't keep clean sheets, can't score goals, and most worryingly, doesn't even seem to have a clear identity anymore. The transformation from earlier in the season is just mind-boggling. Remember when everyone was praising Maresca for his tactical genius? Well, where's that genius now when you're setting up your team to play passive football against a City side that's there for the taking? And here's where we need to have some serious conversations about what happens next, because this Chelsea project is starting to look more like a Ponzi scheme than a football plan. Remember when everyone was saying, oh, but Clear Lake said top 4 isn't the aim until next season? Well, at what point do we start questioning that? At what point do we look at the fact that they've spent £1.5 billion and somehow need more players? What's really interesting about the Maresca situation? The Leicester fans tried to warn everyone, didn't they? They said this would happen. The second half of season collapse, the tactical stubbornness, the inability to kill off games. We're seeing it all play out exactly as they predicted. When you've gone 1-0 up against Fulham and lost, 1-0 up against Bournemouth and drawn, 1-0 up against Palace and drawn, and now this, at some point, it stops being coincidence. And let's talk about these January plans, because this is where it gets absolutely mind-boggling. 11 days left in the window, and what are Chelsea doing? Looking at Garnacho when they desperately need a striker. The clubs had a year to address these problems. They needed a goalkeeper. They needed a center back. They needed legs in midfield. They needed a striker. That's your entire spine. After £1.5 billion spent, how are you still missing your entire spine? The most frustrating thing about all this is that the talent is there. You've got Palmer, who's been brilliant until today. You've got players who can make things happen, but the system just isn't working. And at what point does Maresca have to take responsibility for that? Yes, the board has made mistakes. Yes, the recruitment has been shocking. But when you're setting your team up to play passive football against City, when you're continuing to back Sanchez despite error after error, that's on you. The scary thing is, there's no quick fix here. You can't just throw more money at the problem. They've tried that. You can't just change the manager. They've tried that too. What they need is a complete reset, a clear vision, and most importantly, someone who actually knows what they're doing in charge of recruitment. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Can Chelsea still salvage their season? Is Maresca the right man for the job? And what about that Sanchez performance? Worst goalkeeper in the Premier League? Now let's talk about that absolute masterclass at the Vitality, where Bournemouth just reminded everyone why they're the most informed team in the Premier League. Coming into this one, you're thinking, okay, Forest sitting near the top of the table, Bournemouth missing 10 players through injury. This could be interesting, right? Well, what we got was pure destruction. And let me tell you something about this Bournemouth team. They're doing things that shouldn't even be possible. We're talking about a side that's just put 9 goals past Newcastle and Forest without even having a recognized striker. 2 hat tricks in back-to-back games. This isn't just good form anymore. This is statement-making stuff. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember when everyone was writing Bournemouth off? Remember when people were saying they'd be in a relegation battle? Well, how's this for you? They've just absolutely decimated a Forest team that was sitting second before this game week started. And they didn't just beat them, they made them look like a championship side. The fascinating thing about this performance is how complete it was. From Kepa in goal. And let me tell you something about Kepa. This guy is playing like a 70 million goalkeeper right now. To Dango up front, every single player was operating at peak levels. The fullbacks were solid, the midfield was controlling everything, and going forward, my word, they were absolutely ruthless. Let's talk about Dango Ouattara, because what we're seeing from this lad is absolutely special. Remember when people were questioning whether he was good enough? Well, how about 6 goals in his last 3 games? The way he's leading the line, the movement, the finishing, it's like watching a completely different player. And here's the really scary thing. He's doing this while being played out of position. But it's not just about individual brilliance. What Andoni Iraola has done with this team tactically is nothing short of remarkable. The speed of the passing, the one-touch combinations, the rotations. This is the kind of football you used to see from the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal 10 years ago. When Bournemouth first came up to the Premier League, that was the gap between them and the elite teams. Now, they're the ones playing that kind of football. And let's talk about Tyler Adams, because his return to fitness isn't just a coincidence with this run of form. This is a proper Rolls-Royce of a midfielder we're talking about. The way he wins the ball back, the distribution, the ability to control the tempo, he's absolutely essential to how this team plays. When you've got someone like that in midfield, someone who can do all that dirty work while still being technically excellent, it just elevates everyone around them. And speaking of levels, let's talk about how dominant this performance really was. Forest actually had more shots than Bournemouth today, 17-15, but the difference in quality was absolutely astronomical. Every time Bournemouth went forward, they looked like scoring. Every single attack had purpose, had venom behind it. But here's what's really fascinating about this Bournemouth team. It wasn't just about the attack. Kepa in goal was absolutely phenomenal. Talk about making a statement. There were 2 saves in that second half that were just world class. That's what you need from your goalkeeper in these big games. When the opposition is creating chances, you need someone who can keep you in it. And Kepa is doing that consistently now. And let's talk about Justin Kluivert, because this lad is something special. The way he glides past players, the intelligence of his movement, he's got that same class his dad had. And dare I say it? He might even be better. The technical ability, the composure on the ball, it's like watching a veteran out there, not someone who's still adapting to the Premier League. But what's really impressive about this Bournemouth team is how they're doing this with 10 players out injured. Most teams would crumble under that kind of pressure, but they're just getting stronger. We saw Tavernier come off the bench today. And you know what? That might be his role going forward, because how can you drop any of these players right now? The intensity, the hunger, it's absolutely infectious. There was this moment where Dean Huijsen went up to celebrate the second goal, showing that passion, that belief. That's what this Bournemouth team is all about. When your defenders are playing with that kind of confidence, that kind of swagger, it lifts the whole team. And what about Christie? The way he controlled that midfield, the way he dictated the tempo, it was like watching a conductor with an orchestra. Every pass had purpose. Every movement had meaning. This is what happens when you've got players who understand their roles perfectly, who know exactly what the manager wants from them. But here's what's really interesting about this performance. Forest aren't a bad team. They've been sitting near the top of the table. They've got quality players like Gibbs White, who's having a fantastic season with 11 goals. But today, they looked absolutely average. And that's not because Forest played poorly. It's because Bournemouth made them look that way. When you're pressing with that intensity, when you're moving the ball with that speed, you can make any team look ordinary. So, where does this leave Bournemouth? Because here's what's really interesting. Liverpool might be clear at the top of the table. They might be absolutely flying. But after a performance like this, you've got to fancy Bournemouth's chances. Liverpool won 4-1 today. And you know what? That's not even as impressive as what Bournemouth just did. And let me tell you something. When a team's playing with this kind of confidence, when they're moving the ball like this, when they're scoring goals for fun like this, they can beat anyone. Liverpool probably will not beat this Bournemouth team. And I'll tell you why, because right now, I genuinely don't know when Bournemouth are going to lose again. The scary thing is, they've got 10 players to come back from injury. Just let that sink in for a minute. They've just absolutely demolished a team that was sitting near the top of the table, and they did it with half their squad missing. When you've got that kind of depth, when you've got players coming back who are going to have to fight for their places, that's when you know you've got something special building. Look at where they were under Gary O'Neill. And by the way, imagine telling someone back then that in a couple of years, Bournemouth would be scoring 5 goals against teams in the top 6. It would have sounded crazy. But that's exactly what's happening. The evolution of this team under Iraola has been absolutely phenomenal. But here's what's really fascinating about this Bournemouth team. They're not just winning, they're dominating. Forest might have had more shots today, but look at the quality of the chances. Look at the way Bournemouth are cutting teams open. And when you've got a goalkeeper like Kepa making those world-class saves when needed, you've always got a chance. And speaking of chances, how about this team's efficiency in front of goal? Remember all those games earlier in the season where they had huge XG numbers but couldn't score? Well, they're making up for it now. All those times when they deserved more from games, when they were playing well but not getting the results, it's all coming together now. So, let me know in the comments, how far can this Bournemouth team go? Are they genuine contenders for Europe? And what about Liverpool next week? Are they going to be the ones to stop this incredible run? Because right now, watching this team play, it feels like anything is possible. Football, eh? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, a team like Bournemouth comes along and shows you that sometimes the impossible is possible. Like and subscribe if you want to keep up with all the Premier League action. Across the pitch, over and out.